Hello, Quadra, Channing, Vicky, and Zoe. I decided to make a brief video to respond to the discussion forum, the online discussion this week. So Vicky and Quadra think that the banks, the financial institutions, are the main culprit in the 2008 financial crisis. And Zoe thinks that there's enough blame to go around to consumers, banks, financial institutions, and the government, that everybody has a part to play in this. And while it's true that everybody did have a part to play in this disaster, I think that the main culprits were the people who had the most power. Although it is true that consumers played a part in this and consumers did things that were not very smart, even though they didn't understand the underlying instruments, the underlying financial instruments. A general rule is if you don't understand it, you probably don't want to put a lot of your money into it. And that other simple rule that our mothers taught us, which is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So something like an interest-only loan, where the bank will give you a loan if you only have enough money to pay off the interest and never pay off any of the principal, but you're constantly just paying off the interest every month, you never touch the principal. That doesn't sound like a recipe for success. You're never going to own the house. And maybe you say, okay, well, I'll at least get a place to live, a nice place to live. But the only way the bank wins on that is if housing prices continue to go up and the bank eventually claims the asset that's backing up the loan, that is the house. Not really a recipe for success, especially after the myth of constantly increasing housing prices was shown to be exactly that, a myth. But despite the fact that consumers have some blame to bear in this, and of course the government does, since the government actually took away some regulations before the financial crisis that enabled banks to engage in more risky behavior. I would still say that the bulk of the blame lies at the feet of people who created these fancy financial instruments, things like credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations. And both these things are in a category called derivatives. And derivatives are financial instruments that derive their value from some other asset. So the value of this derivative contract is not in itself, it's connected to some other asset. One of the most popular kinds of derivatives is the futures contract. So you could buy the right to purchase a product, a commodity, at a future date at a set price. So you could buy a gasoline future so that you would be able to purchase 100 gallons of gasoline at $3 a gallon in January of 2020. Now the thing is, the people selling you that futures contract don't actually have to have any gasoline. They can either, at the time that the futures contract is due, and you say, okay, I want my $100 gallons of gasoline at $3 a gallon. Here's your $300. Give me my $100 of gasoline. The person with the futures contract can say, okay, well, it looks like I got stuck because it's January 2020 and gasoline is actually $5 a gallon. So I'm not going to give you 100 gallons of gasoline. I'm going to just give you $500 and I have to eat the loss. You can see what the problem is here is that if the person who's selling the derivative doesn't actually own the asset that the derivative is based on, there could be significant losses involved. And the person who buys the futures contract, if there are enough losses, maybe doesn't make anything. You know, the person who sold the contract just defaults. So there's some risk involved in that. But those are relatively small risks compared to some of the other derivatives that people in the financial institutions came up to deal with the housing market and become very creative with it. One of these is collateralized debt obligations. Now, these collateralized debt obligations, basically what you did was, with mortgages, is you would get a whole bunch of mortgages, put them into a big pool, and then slice them up into shares, and then sell those shares as securities. So the securities they're a derivative, right? They're based on mortgages, which in turn are based on the houses that are behind them, or the other property that's behind them, because there was commercial property involved in this too. So you have this collateralized debt obligation. So you pull all these loans together, and the idea was if you pull all these loans together, there's never going to be enough of them that go bad, because the housing market is always increasing, and the housing market in the United States is always a safe long-term investment, so nothing bad could happen. Well, at the same time, as you know from the video, lenders were giving people all kinds of crazy loans. They were giving loans, the ninja loan, no income, no job or assets. I don't have anything, but loan me $250,000, and the bank would just loan people this money to buy a home, figuring that if the loan went sour, well, they always had the house, and house prices were always going up. So you could see how this got dangerous. You had all these mortgages that everybody said, oh, well, U.S. mortgages, they're a pretty safe investment. And especially if you collateralize them, if you put a whole bunch in, you lower your risk, because you have hundreds of thousands of mortgages in these pools. And so when you pool all these mortgages together that generally are low risk in everybody's mind, and you make the risk even lower. The problem is a lot of these mortgages were ninja loans. They were doomed to not be repaid. And so these collateralized debt obligations, which everybody thought were really good purchases that were safe investments, turned out to be not safe at all. People were aware that there was some risk involved with this, though, because you also had, as the video taught us, we had these other derivatives called credit default swaps. Now, a credit default swap is basically an insurance policy on that mortgage-backed security. So that if the mortgage-backed security goes bad, the investor still doesn't lose his or her money. And as the video taught us, the American International Group, the huge insurance company, were mainly the guarantors of these insurance policies. So of course, when all those mortgage-backed securities went bad, one derivative went bad, well, this other derivative also just collapsed. And AIG, as you know, ended up going into receivership with the U.S. government, and it was not pretty, and it was especially not pretty for a lot of those investors. So that's my 8 minutes, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks.